Welcome to the Green Ocean Weekly Podcast, a show to inspire current and aspiring leaders in real estate. I'm Paige Ward, your host. Today is part 2. In last week's episode, we talked about mattering, and we touched very briefly on Black Lives Matter. And today we're going to really talk about how we can bring those two things together, what that really means. And Helen, let's start with you. And if you could share some of your thoughts on that with us.
In part 1, we talked about the concept of mattering, which is a theory developed by Isaac Prelentensky. And but we can't talk about mattering apart from what is happening societally and politically. So the statement of Black Lives Matter, which originated in 2013, and it is now a movement started by 3 women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. Forgive me if I've mispronounced the names. But it's a movement that started in 2013 by these 3 women. And there was a catalyst for this statement, which is now a movement, hashtag Black Lives Matter. So in 2013, you all probably remember George Zimmerman was being tried. Trayvon Martin was the young Black teen who was shot and killed by George Zimmerman, who was sort of this vigilante, went after Trayvon Martin, suspecting that he was involved in criminal activity. Well, Zimmerman was acquitted for the murder of this young teen. And in response to that decision, it was Alicia Garza who wrote this, and I'll just read it. I continue to be surprised at how little Black lives matter. Black people, period. I love you, period. I love us, period. Our lives matter, period. That's the birthplace of Black Lives Matter. There's been a counter by some groups to the statement and affirmation of Black Lives Matter, that all lives matter. And what's interesting is that when these groups say all lives matter, they're really completely ignoring the meaning of the statement Black Lives Matter. When you say Black Lives Matter, you're not saying that Black lives matter more than other people's lives, than white lives or Asian lives or the lives of police officers, right? It's a statement. Black Lives Matter is saying, you know what, in terms of society, in terms of history, Black lives have mattered much less, or maybe not at all. And we can see these in societal outcomes. So there are about 4 million Black children living in poverty. We think back to the foreclosure crisis, about almost 250,000 Black people lost their homes. That 1 million Black people are incarcerated. And disproportionately with COVID, Black people are affected more in terms of health outcomes related to COVID. So something's going on here. And so to say Black Lives Matter is an affirmation that yes, Black lives do matter. It does not take away from the mattering or the humanity of other racial and ethnic groups in any way. So Prelentensky actually refers to this, this quote by Alicia Garza. And I think he's very much, it's on his mind that mattering is at the heart of who we are as human beings. It also matters at a community and societal level. It's not just about the individuals, it's about communities of people.
Why do you think it is that people have that knee-jerk reaction to say, well, all lives matter.
It could be a number of things. It could be an initial sort of knee-jerk defensiveness of, oh, hold on here, like, Black lives matter. Okay, well, don't all lives really matter? Why do we have to focus on the color of skin? There are some who would argue that we're making too much of race, these demographic differences. We should be living in a post-racist and a post-racial society. Oh, we had a Black president. Doesn't that mean that we're in a post-racial society or post-racist society? Thinking about sort of looking at our history in the United States and looking at present realities, something particular is going on that we call anti-Black racism, that we need to really wrestle with. We need to face it, we need to acknowledge it, and we need to take some action to fight racism as a whole, but in particular, anti-Black racism.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you said, people think we're making too much of race, but quite honestly, that's exactly why we're in this position in the first place, because for so many years, it was about that, but it was quiet and it wasn't talked about, and it was being repeated, over the course of the last couple of 100 years, and it was about that. And now the fact that we are talking about it right here and now is absolutely what we need to do to get beyond that and dream of that day that will come when it doesn't matter anymore and people don't have to see that and talk about it. And I'm so looking forward to that day. I don't know if I'll ever get to experience, but I know we're going in the right direction, so I'm happy about that.
I think there has to be more done at the grassroots level, specific for real estate practitioners and leaders, because there is, when we say DEI, right? I've corrected a lot of people, in terms of the E does not stand for equality, it stands for equity. And the opposite of equity is inequity. And over many generations and years and years and years of history, inequity has occurred because of discrimination, because of all the things in terms of fair housing, not fair housing, the redlining, the steering, the blockbusting, and we're talking about it in context to, oh, that was the past. And yet, some of those things are in the past. Obviously, some of the things are still being done presently right now. Studies still being shown on those kind of things, but we really have to start to address what are some actionable things that we can do. And in some of the conversations, I still get a lot of defensiveness from people saying, oh no, if you look at my organization, we have lots of people of color. In fact, we have a lot of clients that we serve who speak different languages. And I did want to address a couple of items. One of them being that, there is a level of, defensiveness that look at my organization. We serve people of all colors. Our clients are people of all colors. We have, we have agents who speak different languages, as if that checks the box of DEI. And I think that is something that we want to talk a little bit about. And Helen, if you could address almost that, maybe specifically that, just because you've got clients, who speak different languages and are basically foreign nationals, right? Foreign national buyers and sellers of real estate, just because you serve them and you also have agents who speak different languages, who are also immigrants, that doesn't check your DEI box. Because I think, again, leaders are always looking for, oh, look, we're doing a good job. Look, we're not racist. So I think this is a hard but important topic to kind of discuss.
The conversation around diversity is often kind of, to your point, Howard, that we look around in our organizations and we try to see, okay, how much difference is present in our organization? And so diversity can look like a lot of different things. Gender diversity, race and ethnic diversity. You can think about even in the United States, do we have internationals in our organization? Do we have members of the LGBTQ community, et cetera, right? There's also, I think maybe in a past episode, I heard the coach, Hen DeYoung, talk about neurodiversity. That's another type of diversity. You also have to think about ability, right? Different abilities that people have, age diversity, as well as religious diversity, right? So diversity kind of runs this whole gamut. In much of the diversity conversations in organizations, we have focused on race and ethnicity and gender. And, but we got to remember diversity is a little bit bigger than that even. So when we look around in our organizations and think about who's here and we see some diversity and we check the box, well, we can't quite check the box because that's just really optics. And that's why the E and the I are important to wrestle with is, well, yeah, if we have diversity here, are people having an equitable experience in the organization? Does everybody have access to the same resources, to the same training, to the same mentors, to the same kind of developmental and promotional opportunities? Or is there an inequity? That's an example. And then in thinking about the inclusion pieces, do people feel like they belong? And do people get an opportunity to sit at the table? Do they have a voice and a presence to influence decision making in the organization? So DE&I really is multi-layered. It's not just about getting a whole lot of different people in the room. That can be a good starting place, but that it's got to go beyond that, because if you stay there, it's just very superficial.
I actually feel very passionate about this, and I think a lot of us have seen the documentary now, where we see that Blacks represent about 20% of the United States, but they're incarcerated. They represent about 80% of people incarcerated, and that number is shocking to me, right? And that that to me represents something that is broken. Even like choosing words, I don't really know even what words I can say. I need a lot of help with this, how to talk about it. And I find that I can't speak my passion because I'm so busy thinking about choosing the correct language.
I love what you just shared, Jason. I appreciate that. And you're not alone. I think many of us are wondering, gosh, what's the right language to use? If I say this, am I going to offend somebody? Am I going to show myself to be racist, by using this language? There's a lot of fear and worry around that. And I would say, like, even just having this conversation with one another, and we're in a psychologically safe place. We know each other, we trust each other. We kind of need to give ourselves permission to make mistakes. And of course, we probably want to be careful about who we're making those mistakes with, because, honestly, we can cause people harm by the words that we use. And so what I would say is, like, let me give a personal example that I think is kind of parallel to what you're saying, Jason. Is, I wonder sometimes, as an Asian American woman, what is my place in the race conversation? My experience of discrimination is there, it exists. It looks different from maybe a Black colleague of mine, maybe in academia. I'm not necessarily going to go to that Black colleague and say, hey, I'm wondering about this. I'm wondering what my place is in the race conversation, or what can I do? And then kind of look to my Black colleague to give me the solution or the answers. Because honestly, it's not their job to do that for me. And so what I'm learning to do instead is, I want to have these conversations. I'm going to have these conversations with folks like you, or with other Asian Americans who might be also thinking through these same questions. I'm going to go to some resources, because there are actually a ton of resources on these topics, and I'm going to self-educate myself. I'm going to sort of debrief what I'm learning with other people who are also wanting to learn about these things. And I'm going to, adopt some new frameworks and language. And then when I have the opportunity, I'll try it out. I might make a mistake. If I make a mistake, I've got to acknowledge that I've made the mistake, apologize, think about what I can do going from there. There's a great video that I saw by a professor who's a Latina woman, and I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but she said that, it's kind of like we're walking around and from time to time, we're going to step in dog poop. I can't swear on this show, so I'll just say dog poop. And it's like, gross, yuck, I stepped in it. Now what do I do? Well, you got to clean it off. And if that happens in an interaction with somebody and we cause somebody else harm, we've got to do the human thing of, oh my gosh, I've got to acknowledge what's happened. I've got to apologize. I've got to do something to repair this relationship, and then think about, what do I do going forward to do better? Because this is a learning experience. We're going to mess up. I'm going to mess up. Howard, Jason, Paige, we're all going to mess up. But this is part of the learning process. And when we know better, we do better. But we'll make some mistakes along the way. So I think having grace, some grace for ourselves and for others, but also being willing to hold ourselves accountable, be held accountable by others, take feedback, even when it's hard, when it's constructive. We need to have the humility to take that feedback. And it doesn't feel good in the moment, but it's necessary. We got to go through this process.
If somebody is looking to learn some of this, what would you recommend?
Robin DiAngelo. She's actually local. She's a professor at University of Washington. But her book, White Fragility, just really talks about why it's difficult for white people to have this conversation, some of the emotions of defensiveness and fear and vulnerability that may arise. And so I found that to be really helpful. Now, of course, I don't identify as a white person, but what I gained from that book is an understanding and a willingness to sort of interrogate my own privilege, because each of us has privilege kind of related to our various identities. So as an educated Asian woman in this country, I have certain kinds of privilege. And I've got to recognize that and know that I have benefited from a system that has privileged predominantly white people. So now I say that, and I don't say that in any way to offend white people, but historically that's the reality. And it's a system that has disadvantaged people of color, in particular, Black people. So that was a good book for me to kind of think about my own privilege in my identity. And then from there, I went to Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I would say that, don't just read one book without the other. Reading them together has been really transformative for me. So How to Be an Anti-Racist, it's sort of he lays out a blueprint for what it means to call oneself an anti-racist. There's sort of no middle ground. And I think that there are ways in which all of us, we have biases against certain kinds of people and against certain groups. Each of us may be guilty of racist thoughts and attitudes and behaviors, right? And even if we're not like blatantly, explicitly out there, you know, saying racist things, doesn't mean that we ourselves are not also participating in some kind of racism. So it's either you're a racist or you're not or you're anti-racist. And so what does it mean to move into the anti-racism space in terms of my thinking, in terms of my behaviors, in terms of the actions that I'm willing to take? So those are two books that I would recommend. And I also think anything that helps us relearn the history of these United States of America. You know, slavery, it's not like slavery happened and it's over and Abraham Lincoln fixed it. Well, there are all of these implications and consequences that have come out of slavery that, you know, people experience today. And some of that privileges certain groups and some of it just, you know, marginalizes other groups. So there's another book called The New Jim Crow. And that book looks at what does racism look like today. So we had the Jim Crow laws that segregated blacks and whites. Well, that segregation is still occurring. It's just evolved. So racism, it's something that evolves, right? So some people will say we are a post-racist society because slavery was abolished. We had a black president, but that, you know, that's not the case. Racism has just evolved over time, and it's perpetrated and maintained by racist policies and practices.
You know, I think the conversation around awareness is something that's been happening quite well over these past, few months. And it's an amazing starting place, right? I recently heard an acronym that was used by I think it was the Racial Justice Ministry at my church. And she gave a simple acronym as far as their mission. And it was the A did stand for awareness. The R stood for relationships, building relationships, right? Actually, you don't just create an awareness, but build relationships with people and with organizations so that, for something beyond awareness can happen. And finally, the C stands for commitment. It's a long-term commitment. It's not I read that book, I listened to that podcast, I, watched that movie, and it's just like, wow, I didn't know. You know what? That's not enough. I think that's really kind of this place, which is very exciting. A lot of us want to go beyond the awareness, but then we're not sure about the relationships and the commitment. Like, what are those next action steps? And I know people of color all around the world right now are being asked by their friends, hey, give me some more awareness right now, right? Give me some awareness, and Helen alluded to it earlier. It's not really the person of color's job to give you the awareness. I mean, if you've got relationships, it's fine. It's, most are being pretty generous and doing what their part from their experience. But this is a kind of a journey together where an awareness is created by books, and Google's doing an amazing job with their TED Talk-like series. You can just, of course, go to Google, the Google Talks about racism. And there's so many series right now, of course, on Netflix and everywhere else. So let's take bits and pieces of some awareness. And I'll also say those two books that Helen mentioned, I cannot get through them in one sitting. Like, so many books you can just like read cover to cover and you're done in a day or two or a week or what have you. We have to reflect. Like, I can only literally either listen or read maybe 20 or 30 minutes at a time because I got to stop and reflect. It goes internal. Wow, what is my experience? What's my thought on this? And only then can it actually be, I think, more meaningful. So I will say a couple of these books or TED Talks, we do have to take time to reflect.
And just thinking about the business, just at a practical level, as a business or as a real estate office, who do you want to serve? What's the population that you want to serve? And, there are segments in our population that are underserved. So if you want to go after those underserved members of the community, probably need to think about, well, what do we look like, and can we attract those kinds of customers? And that's why diversity in employment is so important, is because when you have more representation of various groups, you can, as a business, attract more heterogeneous individuals, right? And you're broadening your client base. And so it's sort of like, who's the customer base that we're after? Who do we want to serve? And part of that is, okay, we need to have maybe a more intentional recruiting and talent management strategy for this organization. Like attracts like. And that's why, even if we have the best of intentions, if I have an all Asian, team or realtor group, and we're serving just other Asians, and we're like, hey, we should diversify a little bit. We want to serve Black clients. We want to serve Latinx clients, etc. We probably are going to be somewhat limited. Not that we can't serve those clients, but we may be somewhat limited because like does attract like. And so in just thinking about, just at a practical level, those questions of who do we want to serve, and what do we need as a team in order to really serve that segment of the population. I think real estate firms have an incredible opportunity right now to think about who they are serving. And so Jason, I love the fact that you said you're kind of a numbers guy. You like to look at the stats. So I would say, look at the statistics. What are sort of the outcomes that the various firms are achieving? Because housing for families really matters in terms of wealth generation. And that's why Black people who've been left out of the housing market for many years, and I know that redlining no longer is being practiced. It is illegal, right? But for generations upon generations, Black people were not able to actually build wealth, and whereas other people have. And so sometimes people make the argument of, well, some people just need to work harder. We have what we have because we worked really hard. Well, the reality is that the system barred or disadvantaged some people from actually building that wealth. So, I hear realtors all the time say, housing is such a critical part of the life experience, gives us the opportunity to build wealth, not only for ourselves, but to pass it down to our children. That has been the case for me and Howard, for his parents, for my mom, who is able to sustain the lifestyle that she sustains because of the properties that she and my dad owned and sold. So there is something really there, and I really value what realtors do in the community. But I think there's an opportunity to go even further and to think about, how do we help marginalized and underserved people build their wealth? What are some things that we can do as an organization to help facilitate that process? Because it's no longer just about good intent and educating ourselves, going to your point, Howard, of what are we going to do about this? Well, what are some actionable steps that we could take in order to facilitate wealth generation for underserved populations?
Helen, you had great tips on some of the books you can read. There are so many amazing documentaries, movies, things. Howard, I love your advice as far as, don't just consume that information, but really reflect on that and what your part in that is, and what you can do then to be a part of that change. And so I know today I've been inspired by this conversation, and I really appreciate that. And so now I'm just like chomping at the bit to start looking, like we're like, what can I do? What can I do? You know?
I think one of the things as a leadership in real estate, we can in fact, I think, relook at our recruiting strategy, right back to the talent management, and oh well, if I want to, really start to think about what is the makeup of my office, right? Who are the relationships that I can build, ongoing? Who are the existing organizations that are out there who are focused more on this? What can I learn? That takes additional work and time, and I think ultimately when we go back to that relationship building and commitment, the commitment is both time and money, right? And I know that's not easy because those are the two things that we're most concerned about is time and money. But how can I invest time and money in something that I believe is the right thing to do and is good for business, and that I can actually be a part of for the next generation of real estate professionals, industry, my community, for years to come. And I think those are things that we do have to reflect on. And if we are leaders, in terms of diversifying our teams and thinking about, the approach there, we're creative people, we're entrepreneurs. So if we do see that this is both good for my business as well as good for my community, I think we are great. We're just a great group of people who have the heart and mind to do the right thing moving forward. So I'm excited about the next generation of leaders, people who are listening to podcasts like this. So it's an exciting time as long as we take the opportunities.
Yes, if I could add a quick point, I think that there is a movement, or at least the recognition of a need to move from a me to a we culture. And so, in Western societies, we tend to really focus on the individual. We are more individualistic. And I think I'm going to use the example of just wearing a mask in this pandemic. There are some folks who are like, I don't have to wear a mask, and you can't make me wear a mask because you're taking away my individual liberties. And moving from a me to a we culture means that there's a willingness to give up some personal liberties and freedoms for the good of all of us, right? So we wear a mask to protect ourselves and to protect other people, right? So there's something about caring for ourselves, caring for others. That's what moving from a me to a we culture looks like. And we need more of that in the United States. And so we just have to keep working at it. And one other quote that I would like to share, and this comes from James Cone, who is a Black theologian, and he works in the space of liberation theology. And it's just a one-liner. He says, Black liberation does not harm white people. And what I would add to that is liberation of Black people and other marginalized people actually adds to all people, right? And we can't experience wellness, fairness, mattering if those who are marginalized in our society are not experiencing that wellness, because we are interconnected as human beings. We're not isolated individuals, and we need to figure out a way to live in connection with each other. And that's why I think we see so much brokenness. We are broken as a society. We've got to figure out how to move to this we culture, recognizing that liberation of certain people groups is good for all of us. It doesn't take something away. It's not like you add something and you're subtracting something from yourself. No, it's collective.
Thank you, Helen. I appreciate that. I think that if you are joining us today and you've participated in this conversation with us, I thank you, because it just shows that you do want to be part of that change. And to be part of that community that we're building, that we're all a part of, and that we're looking to make this world a better place. Thanks for joining us. We hope you were inspired by today's show. Please be sure to sign up for your free trial of greenoceantv.com. Learn from master-level industry experts and complete the all-important Go Actions. Go Actions help you and your team execute effective tasks in business and life each and every week. We'll see you again soon.